Today we are going to discuss the different types of companies. Companies classified into mainly three, which are classification of companies based on incorporation or registration. The second classification is based on the liability of its members, liabilities of the members of the company. Then third one, companies based on the number of members. These are the mainly three classifications of companies, and there are some other forms of companies based on some other criterias. Let's begin with classification of companies by mode of incorporation. So here the companies are classified based on their incorporation or registration. So there are three kinds of companies. The first one is chartered companies. Chartered companies is an association with investors or the shareholders that is incorporated and granted rights by royal charter. So these are the companies which came into existence by granting rights by any kind of royal charter. So one of the example for these chartered companies was a British East India Company, which was there in India at the time of British ruling. But unfortunately, now there is no chartered companies in India. So chartered companies refers to those companies which came into existence by a royal charter. And the second classification is statutory companies. These companies are incorporated by a special act. See the underlined word, by the special act passed by the central or state legislature. So these companies came into existence by passing a special resolution in the parliament. So these are the statutory companies. The companies are intended to carry some business of national importance. So one of the example for the statutory company is RBI, Reserve Bank of India. You know, RBI is the apex body of banks in India. So RBI is the one of the statutory companies in India. Then the third classification is registered or incorporated companies, which means all those companies which is registered under the Companies Act. The companies are formed or incorporated under the Companies Act passed by the government. So in India, the Companies Act, there is a Companies Act, which is Companies Act 1956. So all those companies which are registered under this Companies Act is known as registered or incorporated companies. And moving on the second classification, companies based on the liability of its members. So here the classification is based on the liability of the members. So basically there are three kinds of companies based on this liability. The first one, company limited by shares. In case of this kind of companies, their members liability is limited to the share value agreed with them. So these companies have a defined share capital, and the liability of each member is limited by the memorandum to the extent of the face value of shares subscribed by them. So if a shareholder subscribed shares of rupees, shares worth of rupees 10 lakh, his liability is limited to that 10 lakh. So such kind of company is known as company limited by guarantee. And the second classification is company limited by guarantee. First classification is companies limited by shares, and the second classification is company limited by guarantee. These companies may or may not have the share capital. Instead, there will be a guaranteed amount. For example, a shareholder who agrees around 15 lakh rupees of a company, they are agreeing that they promise that I'll be purchasing, or I'll be entitling the 15 lakh rupees of this company's capital. So his guaranteed amount is 15 lakh rupees. So that's why his liability limited to that 50 lakhs only. So such companies is known as company limited by guarantee. And the third classification is unlimited companies, where the liability of the members is unlimited. There is no formal restriction to the amount of money that the shareholder or member of the company has to pay in the time of liquidation or winding up. So where the members' liability is purely unlimited, there is no limit on their liabilities. So in India, there is no such kind of companies. In India, unlimited liabilities companies are not allowed to function. So companies based on the liability, there are three types of company limited by shares, company limited by guarantee, and unlimited companies. And the third classification, companies based on the number of members. It is the most important classification for us in this chapter. The first case is public company or public limited company. So public company is a company whose ownership is open to the public. Anybody or any public can subscribe their shares through a valid stock exchange. So anyone can buy shares, anyone can buy or sell their shares in a stock exchange, recognized stock exchange. Such kind of company is known as public company. Then private company, the second classification is private company. Private company cannot issue shares to the public, or it cannot be owned by public. It can be owned by only private parties. There is some restriction on the number of members. Now say it is 200. Private company can have a maximum 200 members on the other hand, and the minimum number is 2. The private company can have 2 to 200 members. On the other hand, public company can be owned by the public, so minimum 7 and maximum there is no limit. The limit is up to sky. So in case of private company, it can be owned by only private parties, and there is a restriction also 200. And we'll discuss the difference between private and public companies in details in next slide. And the third classification is one person company. One person company refers to is an Indian private limited company which has only one founder or promoter, is having only one member. So you have to note that it is a Indian private limited company. So one person company is also a private company, but its members is limited to one. That's the speciality. It is a new form of company which came into existence by the Companies Act 2013. Then now let's move on the difference between public and private company. It is the most important area. I have to acquire clear knowledge about the differences between public company and private company. So let's begin with the meaning. Public company is owned and traded publicly on the stock exchange. Anybody can sell or purchase the shares of a public company through a valid stock exchange. On the other hand, private companies is owned and traded privately. And the next case is use of suffix, a suffix in the name. So the public company will be using limited after their name. Suppose ABC Limited or Reliance Limited or Wipro Limited, etc. So the limited will be shown after their name. In case of private companies, they have to mention private limited after their name. Suppose KS Group of Private Limited or New India Private Limited, etc. Then minimum number of members in public company is 7 and maximum there is no limit. In case of private companies, minimum is 2 and maximum number of members. Public company, there is no limit for the maximum number of members, but instead in private companies, maximum number of member is 200. And the minimum required directors for the public company is 3 and the minimum number of directors required for the private company is 2. And continuing with this differences, a public company can start their business after acquiring certificates of incorporation and certificates of commencement of business. They can start only their business after getting these two kind of certificates from the registrar. But private companies can start after acquiring certificates of incorporation. There is the only one certificate needed to start their business. In case of public companies, the public can subscribe the shares. Anyone in the public can subscribe the shares through a recognized stock exchanges. But in case of private companies, only private parties are allowed to subscribe the shares. The public subscription of shares is not allowed in the case of private companies. So you cannot subscribe a private company's shares. If you want to subscribe, they have to invite you privately. But instead, if you want to purchase any shares of Reliance or Tata or Wipro or Axis Bank or ICICI Bank, that doesn't matter. You have to go to any stock brokers, or you can directly purchase it from the any recognized stock exchange site is BSE or NSE. The next, quorum at AGM. AGM refers to annual general meeting. So the quorum means minimum number of members required for a valid meeting. So minimum number of members required for a valid meeting in a public company is 5, and in case of private company it is 2. So a public company can conduct their uh, annual general meeting with minimum 5 members. On the other hand, private company can conduct their annual general meeting with minimum 2 members. Then statutory meeting is compulsory for the public companies, and it is not compulsory, is optional for the private company. Statutory meetings refers to is a legal compliance. It's a part of legal compliances for the public companies. Then issue of prospectus. Prospectus refers to the invitation letter to the public to subscribe the shares. So public company has to issue their prospectus to invite the public shares. But in case of private company, there is no requirement to, or it is not required to issue prospectus, because they have to deal with only private parties. The next, transferability of shares. In case of public company, the shares can be easily transferable to anyone. We can easily purchase the share, at the same time we can sell it also. But in case of private company, there are some restrictions regarding the transferability of the shares. And the size, generally public companies are huge in size, but in case private company it is smaller than public company. Comparatively it is smaller than public company, but when comparing to other forms of business organizations such as sole proprietorship, partnership, or departmental undertaking, private company is higher, bigger, but comparing to public company, it is smaller. So these are the differences between private and public company, which is the most important one. And now we have to deal with more with public companies in this chapter. So let's moving on a different area. Share capital of a company. A company, being an artificial person, cannot generate its own share capital, which has necessarily to be collected from several persons, right? Whenever the company needs fund, it cannot generate its own funds. Instead, it will be collecting funds from public. So especially in case of public company, they will be collecting funds from public. So those persons who gave their money or who contribute their money to the company is termed as shareholder, and all those money collectively is known as share capital. So share capital of a company is the pool of investment or the pool of money contributed by the members or shareholders. There are different categories of share capital. The first case is authorized share capital. Authorized share capital is the amount of share capital which a company is authorized to issue by its memorandum of association. So it is the registered share capital of a company. At the time of registration, they have to disclose how much is their authorized share capital. So authorized share capital refers to the registered share capital of this company. This is the maximum amount of share capital which the company can issue to the public, or which the company can raise their fund. Then second case is issued capital. Issued capital is that part of authorized capital which is actually issued to the public for subscription, including shares allowed to the vendors and the signatories to the company's memorandum of association. So it is the part of authorized share capital. Suppose a company's share capital is 10 lakh, it will not issue all these 10 lakh to the public at a time. Instead, they will be issuing part by part. So the first time they'll be issuing 5 lakh only. So the 5 lakh is the issued share capital. Then unissued share capital is the part of authorized share capital which is not offered for the public subscription. It's known as unissued share capital. So here, if the company is having 10 lakh rupees registered or authorized share capital, and if the company is issued 5 lakh, there will be unissued share capital of rupees 5 lakh. Simple. Then subscriber share capital is the part of issued capital which has been actually subscribed by the public. If the company issued 5 lakh rupees of share capital to the public, and if the public accepted whole the 5 lakh, which is termed as subscriber capital. And the called up capital is the part of subscribed capital which has been called sorry, which have been called upon the shares. So if there is, in this example, there is 5 lakh rupees subscribed share capital, out of this company will say you have to pay certain amount, and the total the company called up rupees 3 lakh. And paid up capital, company called rupees 3 lakh, and if the shareholders paid only 2 lakh, which is termed as paid up capital. So it's a part of called up capital on which the amount received from the shareholders. And the uncalled up capital is the portion of subscribed capital which has not been called up yet. And the reserve capital is the company may reserve a portion of uncalled up capital, and which will called only at the time of winding up of the company. We will discuss all these matters in detail. See the example here. A company is having authorized capital of rupees, how much is 10 lakh. A company is having authorized share capital of rupees 10 lakh, out of which these shares are divided into 10,000 shares of rupees 100 each. So 10,000 into 100 is the 10 lakh, out of which the company is issuing 5,000 shares. Company is having 10,000 shares actually. This is their authorized or maximum share capital. They can find amount, if for their conduct of business, they can find amount maximum of 10 lakh by issuing their shares, out of which the company is now issuing only 5,000 shares to the public. So the company is actually issuing 5 lakh rupees of shares to the public. Then out of which, when the company issued 5 lakh shares to the public, the public subscribed whole the 5 lakh, so their subscribed capital is rupees 5 lakh. And out of which the company, each share is having a value of rupees 100. One share is equal to rupees 100. If you want to purchase one share of this company, you have to pay rupees 100. And all the shareholders are ready to subscribe all these 5,000 shares. And the company, if even if the share is rupees 100, or the value of a single share is rupees 100, there is no need to pay the entire amount once, because you can pay the amount in installment. Company will be making different company will be providing a facility to pay the share amount in installment. So here you see company first you have to pay rupees, the company says that first you have to pay rupees 50 on each and every share. So the called up value is rupees 50 per share. So total 5,000 share is the issued capital. So the total called up capital is 2,50,000, and out of which all the shareholders except 1,000 were paid the amount. So we'll get, suppose 4,000 share, out of 4,000 shares we got 50 rupees, we'll get 2 lakh rupees. So there is shareholders of 100,000 shares did not pay the amount, so our paid up capital is 2 lakh rupees. So this is the example for getting a clear idea regarding this different categories of share capital. Next, nature and classes of shares. Here, share refers to the units into which the total share capital of a company is divided. In the previous example, we have seen the company is having 10 lakh rupees authorized share capital, but they have subdivided the shares into 10,000 shares of rupees 100 each. So they will be having 10,000 shares of rupees 100 each. So each unit of share is known as shares. Each unit of this share capital is known as share. Thus, a share is a fractional part of the share capital and form the basis for ownership interest in a company. As per section 86 of the Companies Act, company can issue two types of shares. There are two types of shares. First one is preference shares and equity shares. So first of all, let's discuss what is preference shares. According to Section 85 of the Companies Act 1956, a preference share is one which fulfill the following condition. Mainly, there are two conditions with the preference shares. First one, that preferential shareholders carries a preferential right to dividend. You know what is dividend? Dividend is the profit on their investment. So all those preferential shareholders having a preferential right to get their dividend first before the equity shareholders or any other shareholders. And the second classification is preferential right to repayment of capital at the time of winding up. So if the company is winding up, the preference shareholders have the right to get their capital repayment before equity shareholders. So the main concept of preference shares is that they're having preferential right over the dividend, and the second one is preferential right over the repayment of capital. And these preference shares capital are further classified into four type: cumulative and non-cumulative preference shares, participating and non-participating preference shares, redeemable and irredeemable preference shares, convertible and non-convertible preference shares. We'll discuss it in detail in coming classes. And the second case is equity share capital. Equity share capital, according to Section 85, the Companies Act 1956 defines an equity share is a share which is not a preference share. That's a simple definition for equity share capital. An equity share is a share which is not a preference share. So all those share which is not a preference share will be the equity shares. In the other words, shares which do not enjoy any preferential right in the repayment of dividend or the pay repayment of capital. So if those shares does not having any preferential rights, can be treated as equity shares or ordinary shares. And there are some basic differences between equity shares and preference shares. The first one, right to get dividend. Preference shareholders having a preferential right to get dividend before the preference shares, but in case of equity shareholders there is no preferential right on the dividend. And the right of dividend, in case of preference shareholders, most of the cases the right is defined or the right is fixed earlier. So say it is 9% or 10% or 12%, but there is no fixed dividend in case of equity shares, and it can be determined by the board of directors. And the redemption, though preference shares can be redeemed after a due date, but in case of equity share, there is no redemption, but company can buy back these shares later. Then voting right. This preference shareholders does not have any voting right except only in some special circumstances. But equity shareholders having a voting right. They are the real owners of this company. They have voting rights. Then requirement of formation. A new company cannot formed only with preference shares. A company with preference shares is not possible. I mean, company with only preference shares is not possible, but a company with only equity shares is possible, or it can be a mixture between equity shares and preference shares. But a company with preference shares only, it is not possible, but a company with equity shares can be formed. And the next case, the type, there are 8 type of preference shares. I mean, we have later, I mean, in the previous slide we have seen the 4 differences, and there are opposites. So I mean, convertible, non-convertible, transferable, non-transferable, redeemable, irredeemable, like so. And in equity shares there is no such kind of types. And in detail we'll be discussing the share capital areas. Meet you in next class. Thank you.